I wonder if you've ever asked yourself this question: is there really a heaven? At this morning's services, I said, is there really a heaven? Do you ever wonder that? And lots of people nodded. Yes, we do. Even as Christians, we wonder sometimes, is there really a heaven? Yes, I know we'd like to think there is, but is there one? Most people, well, I don't know, most people, many people think that death is like sleep. We close our eyes for the last time and that's it. Is there a heaven? And if there is a heaven, will I get to be in God's heaven? I'm now closer to 60 than I am to 50. Sarah very kindly pointed that out to me earlier this week. Friends of my age are starting to die with increasing regularity. And when friends of ours go into a COVID or a cardiac or a cancer ward, we find that very sobering, don't we? Let me give the game away concerning this sermon. Let me tell you where we are going to this evening. There is a heaven for those who love Jesus. And in the time that he gives us here, before he takes us there, he will tell us all we need to know. He will give us all we need to have, because he is committed to us beyond our imagination. And we know all of this from what happened that first Christmas. Hebrews chapter 1, a sermon written to Jewish Christians, to Hebrew Christians, concerning the one born in Bethlehem. The one who caused the shepherds to rejoice, the Magi to worship, his mum Mary to marvel. But the one Herod wanted to kill, the one 30 years later all of Jerusalem did kill, but the one who came back to life, never to die again. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets in many times and in various ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. There is a God. We know that because he's come in the person of Jesus. And if we know there is a God, we know there is a heaven, because by definition, that is where God lives. Jesus was born as a human. Jesus died as a human. Jesus came back to life again as a human. Jesus returned to heaven as a human. Jesus is today in heaven as a human. I said early this afternoon when I was pondering this again, I think it is extraordinary that Jesus stayed a human, that he wasn't merely a human just for those 33 years. There is now a human in heaven. We now know conclusively that heaven is for humans as well as for God. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Yes, he did, and that's what we call the Old Testament. A small number of special people, the prophets, God spoke to them through dreams, through visions, through intuition. To the greatest prophet Moses, God spoke directly, audibly, clearly, resulting in God's people knowing his wonderful ways of doing things, his laws, knowing how to keep safe. But none of these prophets had the capacity to grasp what God was saying fully. An ultimate prophet was needed to reveal that. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. We need to keep reminding ourselves that God is more complicated than us. Unlike us, he is not one person. God is, and the picture the Bible repeatedly uses, a family of three, and genuinely three different persons, not merely the same person that keeps popping up with a different hat on. Jesus is the Son of God. That expression meant far more to the Jewish mind than it does to us. The elder son represented the father in the family business. The elder son has the same concerns as the father. The elder son speaks for the father. And elsewhere we learn of a third family member, God the Holy Spirit. One God, but three persons, each person different, each person fully God. But in these last days, God has spoken to us through his Son. God the Father has sent God the Son to build on, to expand on, to complete the message of the prophets. At his baptism, God the Holy Spirit also came down to enable God the Son to communicate, to enable his listeners to hear. God the Father's words as the Spirit descended from heaven, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Aren't there so many voices clamoring in our ears? You ask half a dozen people what they think about the meaning of life, what happens when we die, you will get half a dozen different answers. All religions are the same, some say. That is just not true, because they say contradictory things. We simply don't know, others say. We can only guess, we can only hope, we can only follow our own path. No, since Bethlehem, the guessing games can stop. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various places, but in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. Because of the person that came down at Bethlehem, we can know all we need to know. In these last days, that's a striking expression, isn't it? You used to see people wearing sandwich boards proclaiming the message, the end of the world is nigh. Periodically down the centuries, there have been various predictions about the day the world is going to end. I think it's more common these days for people to think that one day the world is going to end, but in their thinking, it won't be caused by God. It will be mankind destroying the planet to such an extent that it can't sustain us anymore. Now, the message of the Bible is radically different. God made and loves this world for a purpose. He made his prized possession humankind. How precious is humankind in God's sight? So precious that God the Son became a human and has stayed a human. We still have that thought Jesus first came into existence just in Mary's womb. No, we're reminded here, verse 2, but in these last days he has spoken to us through his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. God the Son was active long before Bethlehem. It was through him that the universe was made. There is so much more to this baby than we ever thought. And God the Father has appointed him heir of all things. Of course he has. A father makes his son his heir. Everything that belongs to the father belongs to the son. Everything that the father has responsibility for, the son now also has responsibility for. God's perfectly wonderful world created through Jesus that then went sour because men and women and children didn't want to live under his perfect rule. And so in the first part of world history, God spoke through the prophets of what he would do in the last part of history. He would send his son and heir, who at the end of that age would bring in a new creation for those that wanted to live under his perfect rule, which is exactly where we are today. We're waiting. Waiting to die? Well, yes, in a sense we are, but not in a morbid way, more in an expectant way. Because then we will see Jesus, enjoy being with Jesus, enjoy working with Jesus in whatever fantastic and satisfying and magnificent role that he has for us for all eternity. But even more than waiting for the end of our own lives, we are waiting for the end of these last days, this last period of history. And the end of this flawed world will not be caused by nuclear war or global warming or a future pandemic. It will be caused by the heir of all things calling time and inaugurating his perfectly restored creation. And then it will be paradise. Then it will be Eden restored. Then it will be heaven. There is a heaven for those who love Jesus. And in the time that he gives us here, before he takes us there, he will tell us all we need to know. He will give us all we need to have, because he is committed to us beyond our imagination. And we know all of this from what happened that first Christmas. Given all of this, how am I going to live now? In the light of my own mortality, in the light of the mortality of those I love, in the light of a world that in some ways is fantastic, but in other ways is heartbreaking. How am I going to live now? I'm going to live confidently and contentedly and joyfully. There is a heaven for those who love Jesus. And in the time that he gives us here, before he takes us there, he will tell us all we need to know. He will give us all we need to have, because he is committed to us beyond our imagination. And we know all of this from what happened that first Christmas.